Motorhead's legacy is loud, fast, and full of controversies. And while Motorhead fans are quite used to and by now don't even notice most of accusations against Lemmy's famed memorabilia collection, the story of the first ever Motorhead concert still sounds offensive to many.
Yeah.
You know, that 1940s German soldiers' marching sound, followed by a speech from one of the most notorious figures in history thing. But did that actually happen? Or is it just another piece of Motorhead mythology passed around in backstage whispers? Well, today, let's take a look at the most controversial Motorhead story, where it came from, and what it really tells us about how far Motorhead were willing to go shock, provoke, and make sure you never forgot their name. Here you go. Super quick guys, as always, please do not hesitate to comment on anything you hear or see in this video, and especially if you disagree with me, because the whole point of our Metal Pilgrim channel is of course to start a conversation. But alright, let's do it! The story of the first ever Motorhead concert is the one that pretty much every fan has heard in at least some interpretation. And if you haven't, well, the tale goes like that. At their first ever live show on July 20th in 1975, before even going up on stage and playing live for the very first time ever, Motorhead kicked things off by blasting a recording of a certain speech from World War II, followed by the sound of boots marching on cobblestones, after which they tore straight into their set. And no, it wasn't the Churchill speech, but rather the other guys. And if you dig around online, there are versions of that 1975 Roundhouse gig that include this infamous tape right before the band plays, which is very raw and kind of disturbing, but at the same time extremely believable, as it sounds exactly like something Lemmy might have done just to piss everyone off.
Oh yeah.
And by the way, I hope that it goes without saying, at least for everyone who is a regular viewer of this channel, that in no way Lemmy Kilmister was even remotely sympathizing the bad guys in World War II. Quite the opposite. Lemmy stated in multiple interviews that he was simply a memorabilia collector and he was fascinated with that time period. But once again, he made it very clear that his position is pretty much aligned with the official one. Those were the bad guys. By the way guys, in case you didn't know, in addition to the one that stirred the pot, Lemmy actually also had a rather extensive collection of Jewish soldiers' memorabilia. But I guess no one would really talk about that, because that wouldn't really make a headline, right? By the way guys, super quick, just want to point out that only around 30% of the people who watch my videos are actually subscribed to the Metal Pilgrim channel. So if you're not one of those, and especially if this is not the first video you're watching here, I would really appreciate it if you would consider subscribing right now. Let's continue building this amazing heavy metal community together. But anyways, going back to the concert, although this story seems to be quite straightforward, some things about it don't actually align. First of all, I have to point out that according to Stefan Alloy, a long-time Motorhead researcher, that entire intro tape was actually fake, added years later by some bootleg collector to try to make this tape more authentic. They've never used the speech you hear on the beginning of many copies of this recording. It's a fake pre-recording added many years ago by some guy who had a copy of that tape. Lemmy told me he was horrified by that, said Stefano in one of the liner notes, adding that this urban story is 100% false.
It's false. No way. Not this time.
So, clear cut then. Everything's clear. This one is absolutely fake, right? Well, not really. Because this is where things go full Motorhead. If we take a look at the liner notes for the On Parole remaster, drummer Lucas Fox actually tells a very different story of how it went, saying Lemmy used a recording of marching feet and yelling things you cannot pronounce on YouTube. It just sounded really powerful and incredibly cold. All those feet smashing on the cobblestones, that bromp, the things you cannot say on YouTube were still echoing around the room as Lemmy shouted, "We are Motörhead and we play rock and roll," before we kicked off the set. So what the flip is going on? Does the revelation by Lucas Fox himself mean that it did actually happen and that intro tape was played during that show? Once again, not really. Because if we actually listen to the allegedly bootleg recording of that show, we clearly hear no margin and rather different sounds from the ones described by Lucas.
That was the voice of adult.
And there's definitely no iconic Lemmy "We Are Motorhead" thing there. So what is going on? By the end we have three completely different stories of the same concert. A bootleg recording, which allegedly should be the fact. Stephen Alois, a rather respectable Motorhead fan, notes that it was a fake one and there was no intro whatsoever, apparently confirmed by Lemmy himself, and the notes from Lucas Fox, the actual drummer of Motorhead at that time, on one hand somewhat playing along with the myth, but on the other one recalling a story which does not actually match the alleged proof of it. So did it actually happen or not? And if it did, which of the two versions of that story is actually true? Well, thanks to you, Metal Pilgrims, I was actually able to get some testimonies from the two people who actually attended that show on July 20th in 1975. And both of those said that they do not recall any intro tapes before that concert whatsoever. And definitely not a speech by the infamous German dictator of the 1940s. And yes, on one hand I do understand that this concert happened 50 years ago, and actually this summer marked exactly 50 years since the first ever Motorhead show, and thus yes, some memories may be altered, but still it's kind of strange that both people actually said that they do not recall anything like that whatsoever, with one of them saying that he would have definitely left the building if that was true. So my personal best bet would be that this story is actually a myth. A myth which is almost true.
It's a made-up tale. It's a total fabrication. It never happened.
It is no secret that Lemmy Kilmister was simply obsessed with war memorabilia. And I don't mean it in a he had a couple of medals up on his shelf kind of way. No. His apartment was full of helmets, knives, medals, flags, uniforms from all sides of the battlefield. And a bunch of different wars. But to Lemmy, this stuff was never about politics. Quite the opposite. It was about history, death, survival, and the hypocrisy of it all. Lemmy was an anarchist who cared about loud music, truth in chaos, and getting a rise out of anyone who took themselves too seriously. So when he wore an Iron Cross on stage or had a World War II German dagger on his bookshelf, it wasn't to send a message at all. It was done to provoke, confuse, and confront hypocrisy. And he has been doing that since the very beginning of Motorhead, which we can clearly see in one of the first versions of Snaggletooth, which he later on had to alter. Which actually does remind me that in our previous The History of Snaggletooth episode, I actually did promise you a special video on all of the different variations of the legendary Motorhead mascot that were not used by the band for different reasons, including because some of them were way over the top. So please let me know if you would still want me to release that one in the comments. Although it's way overdue, I know that. But anyway, such behavior, including the infamous 2008 trial against Lemmy Kilmister in Germany, despite the whole fact that Lemmy did point out that he collected stuff, not ideas, of course did spark quite a lot of speculations. Which brings us right back to the bootleg tape. Because here's the thing, whether that intro was real or not, the truth is that it actually feels like something Lemmy could have done. But it wouldn't even matter. Because back in 1975, shock value mattered. And Lemmy, more than anyone else, knew exactly what kind of noise would cut through the crowd. And anyone who, like myself, has ever met Lemmy Kilmister, who simply despised racism and any kind of discriminatory behavior against anyone who is not an would have known that even if that did happen, Lemmy would have done that definitely not because he sided with the bad guys. And especially since that, I'm 100% sure, did not actually happen. So yes, by the end of the day, it doesn't even matter. Although I am now 99% sure that that intro tape was actually fake. Motorhead themselves were trying to stir the pot from time to time and did feed that myth, but in reality that tape never sounded live before the first ever Motorhead gig in 1975.
Don't forget us. Our name is Motörhead. We play rock and roll.
But anyways, what do you guys personally think about that gig, and which version of that story you think is true, as well as whether you would like me to release more special Motorhead episodes on the show very, very soon. Please let us know in the comments. As always, thank you so much for watching this video, guys, and we will prevail. Slava Ukraini!